The silence in Thornridge's Elder Council chamber was the kind that swallowed breath, the kind that preceded death. It pressed against the ancient stone walls like a living thing, heavy with grief and the bitter taste of failure. Alpha King Daxon of Ironpeak stood at the center of 12 elder wolves, cradling his infant son against his chest. The child's breaths came in shallow, rattling gasps that made even the oldest wolves flinch. Kale's skin had gone the color of ash, his tiny fingers curled into fists so tight the knuckles showed white. Behind his half-closed eyelids, something flickered, a desperate spark of gold that guttered like a candle drowning in wax. "There is no name for this affliction, my king." High Healer Maven stepped back from the dying pup, her weathered hands trembling as she lowered them to her sides. Her voice carried the weight of surrender. Around the circle, 11 other heads bowed in silent agreement. "The boy's wolf is severed from his soul," Maven continued, each word a nail in a coffin. "He will not last the night." Daxon's jaw clenched so hard his teeth should have shattered. His golden eyes that had commanded armies and broken rebellions, burned with a fury that had nowhere to land, no enemy to strike. For 2 days he had ridden without rest, crossing 3 territories, calling on every healer with power in their blood and wisdom in their bones. All had given him the same answer: the heir to Ironpeak was doomed. "Someone." His voice came out raw, scraped clean of authority and reduced to the desperate plea of a father. "Someone must know something. There must be—" "My king." Maven's interruption was gentle, merciful even. "We have tried everything. Ancient rites, blood magic, prayers to the first wolves. The child's spirit is slipping into the shadow realm, and nothing we possess can call it back." Daxon looked down at his son, at the tiny face that would never grow, never shift for the first time, never run under the moon. His heir, his heart, his whole world, reduced to these final struggling breaths. Then, from the shadowed archway at the chamber's edge, came the sound of footsteps, soft, hesitant, completely uninvited. Every head turned as one. The woman who emerged from the darkness looked like she'd been sewn together from scraps and desperation. Her cloak was threadbare, patched with mismatched cloth that had seen too many winters. Silver blonde hair hung in tangled waves past her shoulders, unbound and unkempt in a way that declared her status louder than any brand. Her eyes, pale as winter frost, too large for her thin face, fixed on the dying pup with an intensity that made Maven take an instinctive step backward. "No!" Maven's voice cracked like a whip. "Absolutely not! Guards, remove her!" But the woman kept walking, her steps carrying her through the circle of elders as if their outrage was nothing more than wind. "She's from the Forgotten Quarter," one elder hissed. "A scavenger." "Probably here to beg," another muttered. "Get her out before she brings vermin into sacred space." The woman's gaze never wavered from the child. She moved like someone walking through a dream or toward an execution, the same hollow certainty in every step. When she reached the inner circle, she dropped to her knees in front of Daxon with a suddenness that made his warriors reach for their blades. "Let me try." Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the chamber's hostility like a knife through silk. Maven moved to block her, hands raised. "This is not a place for your kind. The Alpha King does not need charlatans adding insult to—" "Let me try." This time the woman looked up, and Daxon found himself staring into eyes that held something he'd stopped hoping for an hour ago. Certainty. Not the false confidence of someone selling hope, not the desperate bluster of a last resort. This woman looked at his dying son like she could hear something no one else could, like she was listening to a frequency beyond mortal ears. "Please." The word escaped Daxon before he could stop it, before pride or protocol could cage it. "Please," Maven started to protest. Daxon silenced her with a look that could have split stone. The woman, Rhaine, he would learn later, though in this moment she was nameless as hope itself, reached out with hands that bore the calluses of hard living and the stains of medicinal herbs. Her fingertips brushed Kale's fevered brow, and she went utterly still. The chamber held its breath. Rhaine's eyes slid closed. Her lips moved soundlessly, forming shapes that weren't quite words, searching for something in the spaces between heartbeats. The elders watched with expressions ranging from skepticism to outright contempt. But Daxon saw what they didn't. Saw the way her entire body had gone rigid with concentration, the way a single tear tracked down her cheek, as if she was hearing something beautiful and terrible at once. Then her eyes snapped open, blazing with an inner light that had nothing to do with wolf gold and everything to do with something far, far older. She leaned down, her lips nearly brushing the infant's ear, and whispered a single word. The sound of it was barely audible, more breath than voice, but it hit the chamber like a thunderclap. Every elder gasped. Maven stumbled backward. The torches along the walls flared bright enough to hurt, and Kale's eyes flew open, burning pure molten gold. The pup's tiny chest expanded with a gasp that sounded like someone breaking the surface after drowning. His back arched, his fists unclenched, and a pulse of pure life force exploded outward from his small body. A shockwave of power so primal it made the ancient stones themselves shudder in recognition. Daxon nearly dropped him in shock. Kale began to cry, not the weak mewling of a dying thing, but the full-throated wail of a healthy, furious infant demanding to be heard. The Alpha King's breath left him in a rush. His son, alive, whole. He looked down at the woman still kneeling before him, this stranger in rags who had just performed a miracle, and saw her swaying slightly, her face drained of color, her frost-pale eyes unfocused, as if she'd spent something vital to pull his son back from death's threshold. "What?" His voice failed him. He tried again. "What did you do? What are you?" Rhaine looked up at him, and in her expression Daxon saw something that chilled him more than his son's near death had. Fear. Not of him, but of herself, of what she'd just revealed. "I spoke his name," she whispered. "His true name." The chamber erupted. "Impossible," Maven breathed, staggering against the nearest elder. "That gift was lost. The bloodlines died out 3 centuries ago. They were hunted to extinction." "Witchcraft," another elder snarled, pointing a shaking finger at Rhaine. "She's cursed the child, not healed him. My king, you must—" "Silence." Daxon's voice cracked like breaking ice, and every wolf in the chamber felt it in their bones. The alpha command of a king who had just watched his world end and begin again in the space of a heartbeat. He stared at Rhaine, at this impossible woman who had saved his son with a power that shouldn't exist, and felt the ground shift beneath everything he thought he knew. She had given him back his heir, but she had also just revealed herself as the most dangerous creature in the 5 territories, a true name-bearer, a living weapon capable of commanding the very souls of wolves. And she was kneeling at his feet, vulnerable and exhausted, with 12 elders already calling for her death. "Guards!" His voice came out steady, though his world was spinning. "Take her into custody. If you believe people who save lives shouldn't be punished for their gifts, hit subscribe. Only those who fear power over justice won't. Comment, 'Gifts aren't crimes' if you stand against the elders who want her dead." Rhaine's eyes widened, betrayal flashing across her face before resignation settled in like an old, familiar coat. "You promised," she said softly, more to herself than to him. "A blood oath. Anyone who saves your son would be granted anything in your power to give." Daxon's throat tightened. She was right. He had shouted that oath to the uncaring heavens outside Thornridge's gates, desperate and wild with grief. He knelt down so they were eye to eye, close enough that only she could hear his next words. "I'm granting you your life," he said quietly. "But I cannot grant you your freedom. Not yet. Not until I know what you are, what you can do, and who else knows about you." Understanding dawned in her winter frost eyes, along with something that might have been disappointment, or might have been the acceptance of someone who'd always known this moment would come. "I'm your prisoner, then." "You're under my protection," Daxon corrected, though the distinction felt hollow even to his own ears. "And you're coming with me to Ironpeak." Behind them, Cale continued to wail, alive and healthy and completely unaware that his salvation had just become someone else's damnation. Rhaine rose on unsteady legs as Daxon's warriors closed in around her, their hands carefully respectful but their grip inescapable. She cast one last look at the infant in the Alpha King's arms, the child whose true name she had spoken, whose soul she had called back from the void, and wondered if saving him had been an act of mercy or the worst mistake of her life. Maven stepped forward, her voice sharp with authority and fear. "My king, you cannot seriously intend to harbor a true name-bearer. The old laws are clear. They were exterminated for a reason. Their power is too dangerous to—" "The old laws," Daxon interrupted, his golden eyes still locked on Rhaine, "were written by wolves who feared what they couldn't control. I'm not interested in fear. I'm interested in the truth." He shifted Cale to one arm and raised his free hand, commanding absolute attention. "This woman saved my son's life when all of your ancient wisdom declared him lost. That means something, and until I understand exactly what it means, she stays under my protection and my watch." The emphasis on the last word was not lost on anyone in the chamber. Rhaine felt the weight of every eye on her, some filled with hatred, some with fear, all with suspicion. She had lived her entire life hiding what she was, speaking to the dying in whispers, using her gift only when desperation outweighed caution. Now she stood exposed in front of the most powerful wolves in the territory, her secret laid bare, her fate in the hands of a king who looked at her like she was both miracle and threat. The Alpha King straightened, his son cradled securely against his chest, and gestured to his warriors. "We ride for Ironpeak within the hour. Ready the horses." As they led her toward the archway, Rhaine heard Maven's voice one last time, cold and certain as prophecy. "You've just brought a viper into your home, my king, and when she strikes, don't say you weren't warned." Rhaine didn't look back. She had saved a life tonight. But as the chamber doors closed behind her and the weight of her chains, invisible but absolute, settled around her soul, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd also just sealed her own fate. The word that had woken the heir had also awakened something far more dangerous, the attention of a king, the fear of his court, and the ancient, bloody history of a gift that had once been considered too powerful to exist. And now, whether she wanted it or not, Rhaine was walking straight into the heart of that storm. The ride to Ironpeak took 3 days, and Rhaine spent every moment of it surrounded by warriors who wouldn't meet her eyes. They kept a careful distance, as if her gift might be contagious, as if speaking a word too close to her might give her power over their souls. She rode a gray mare with no saddle, her wrists bound with silk rather than iron, a courtesy that felt more like mockery. Prisoners got chains. Guests got freedom. She had neither. Daxon rode at the column's head with Cale bundled against his chest, the infant's healthy cries a constant reminder of what she'd done and what it had cost her. The Alpha King hadn't spoken to her since they left Thornridge. Every time she caught a glimpse of his profile, she saw the same tension in his jaw, the same war playing out behind his eyes, gratitude versus fear, obligation versus self-preservation. When Ironpeak's walls finally rose from the mountain fog, Rhaine understood why they called it a sovereignty rather than a territory. The fortress sprawled across the clifftop like a crown of stone and steel, its towers piercing the low clouds, its banners snapping in wind that tasted of pine and coming snow. This wasn't just a pack's home. This was the seat of power for 5 territories, the place where kings were made and broken, and she was riding toward it as a prisoner. The great hall of Ironpeak could have swallowed Thornridge's entire village square. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadow, and ancient pillars carved with the faces of long-dead alphas stood like silent judges. When Daxon's warriors escorted her through the massive doors, Rhaine felt the weight of centuries pressing down on her shoulders. Every wolf in that hall turned to stare, and the whispers started immediately, spreading like poison through water. "That's her, the one who touched the heir. I heard she's a true name-bearer." "Impossible. They're extinct." "Then what is she?" Daxon moved through the crowd with Kale still in his arms, his presence commanding instant silence. He stopped before a raised dais where 12 seats formed a semicircle, the Elder Council of Ironpeak, their faces carved from granite and suspicion. At the center sat a woman whose silver hair was bound in intricate braids, her eyes sharp enough to draw blood. "Alpha King." Her voice carried the particular authority of someone who had advised 3 generations of rulers. "We heard about Thornridge, about the miracle." The word dripped with skepticism. "We also heard about the method." "Elder Voss." Daxon inclined his head with just enough respect to avoid insult. "I present Rhaine of Thornridge, who saved my son when all other healers declared him lost. And we demand her immediate execution." The voice came from an elder on the left, his face florid with rage. "The old laws are clear, my king. True name-bearers were hunted to extinction for the threat they posed. This creature could speak your name right now and command your wolf to serve her. She could enslave every warrior in this hall. She is an abomination that must be— She saved my son." Daxon's voice cut through the tirade like a blade. "That earns her more than a death sentence." "It earns her a trial," Elder Voss said smoothly, "to determine what she is and whether she poses a threat to the sovereignty. Until then, she will be confined to the East Tower under constant guard." Confined. Not imprisoned, not executed, but not free either. Rhaine had lived in the margins long enough to recognize a cage when she saw one, no matter how politely they described it. Before anyone could respond, the hall's side entrance burst open. A woman swept in, her healer's robes embroidered with the silver thread that marked her as court physician. Her dark hair was streaked with gray, and her eyes held the kind of sharp intelligence that missed nothing. "Forgive the interruption, my king, but I must speak with you immediately." She glanced at Kale, and her expression shifted to something Rhaine couldn't quite read. "About your son's illness." Daxon's entire body went rigid. "Senna, what did you find?" The physician, Senna, moved closer, lowering her voice though everyone in the hall strained to hear. "I examined the child as you requested. My king, that was no natural affliction." The hall went deathly quiet. "The air was poisoned," Senna continued, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "Shadow-wrought magic, designed to sever a wolf's soul from its body. The traces are faint, but unmistakable. Someone tried to murder your son." The silence shattered. Elders rose from their seats, voices rising in outrage and accusation. Warriors reached for weapons they weren't carrying, and every eye in the hall turned to Rhaine, suspicion crystallizing into certainty. "The witch did it!" someone shouted. "She poisoned the heir and then pretended to save him to gain the king's trust. It's the perfect infiltration. She's been sent by our enemies. Execute her now before she—" "Enough!" Daxon's roar silenced them all, the alpha command in his voice making every wolf in the hall bare their throat in instinctive submission. If Rhaine wanted the heir dead, she could have let him die. Instead, she saved him. That makes her either innocent or the worst assassin in history. Elder Voss stood, her voice cutting through the chaos with surgical precision. "Or it makes her part of a larger conspiracy, my king. Think. Someone poisons your heir with magic that requires intimate knowledge of true names to counteract. Then a true name-bearer, a gift we believed extinct, conveniently appears to save him, binding you to her with a blood oath and gaining access to the heart of your sovereignty." She paused, letting the implication sink in. That is not coincidence. That is strategy. Rhain's blood went cold. She had walked into something far more dangerous than a king's gratitude. She had walked into a web that had been spun before she ever whispered Kael's name, and now every thread was tightening around her throat. Daxon looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw the exact moment doubt crept into his eyes. The moment he wondered if saving his son had been mercy or manipulation. The moment the fragile thread of trust between them began to fray. "Take her to the East Tower," he said quietly. "Post guards at every entrance. No one sees her without my explicit permission." As warriors closed in around her, Rhaine caught Senna's gaze. The physician was watching her with an expression that held neither hatred nor fear, but something far more unsettling: curiosity. Like Rhaine was a puzzle to be solved, a specimen to be studied. The last thing Rhaine heard before they led her from the hall was Elder Voss's voice, cold and certain. "The trial begins in 3 days, my king. If she cannot prove her innocence, the old laws demand her death. If you can't stand when innocent people are blamed for crimes they prevented, smash that like button. Comment, 'Heroes deserve justice,' if you're not siding with those who want to execute the woman who saved the heir. Only false accusers and manipulators won't engage." And as the great doors closed behind her, Rhaine realized the truth. She hadn't saved Kael from a conspiracy. She'd stumbled into the middle of one, and now she was trapped at its center with no way out and no idea who had cast the net. The East Tower had been built for guests, not prisoners, but Rhaine could feel the difference in every locked door and posted guard. Her room was beautiful in a cold, impersonal way. Stone walls softened by tapestries, a bed piled with furs she'd never afford in 3 lifetimes, windows that looked out over mountains she couldn't reach. A gilded cage was still a cage, but cages had cracks, and Rhaine had spent her entire life slipping through them. On the 3rd night, when the guards changed shifts and their attention wavered for the space of 3 heartbeats, she pressed her palm against the tower's ancient stone and listened. Not with her ears, but with the gift that had marked her since birth. The same gift that could hear the true names of the living could also hear the echoes of the dead, whispers caught in stone and timber, fragments of truth that clung to places where strong emotions had burned themselves into the world's memory. The tower's walls had witnessed centuries. Most of it was mundane: arguments between lovers, children's laughter, the quiet desperation of political prisoners. But underneath, like a dark current, she heard something else. Voices discussing shadow magic, plans spoken in careful whispers, and a name that made her blood freeze: Corvin, Daxon's beta, his most trusted warrior. The fragments were scattered, incomplete, but the pattern was unmistakable. Someone close to the Alpha King had access to shadow-wrought poison, someone who knew about true names and how to sever a wolf's soul. Someone who might have orchestrated the entire conspiracy. Rhaine needed proof, and proof meant searching the one place in Ironpeak where secrets went to hide: the archives. She slipped from her room during the hour before dawn when even guards grew careless with exhaustion, moving through the fortress like she'd been born to its shadows. The archives sprawled beneath the Great Hall, a labyrinth of shelves carved directly into the mountain's stone. Ancient texts bound in leather and bone lined the walls, their pages yellow with age and dense with knowledge most wolves had forgotten. She found what she was looking for in a section marked with warnings in 3 dead languages: records of the true name purges, accounts of how the gift had been systematically hunted from the bloodlines, and tucked between those accounts, recent additions, research on shadow magic, notes on soul severance, drawings of ritual circles that made her skin crawl. Someone had been preparing. Someone had known exactly what poison to use and how it would work. "I wondered if you'd come here." Rhaine spun, her heart slamming against her ribs. Daxon stood in the archway, dressed not in his king's finery, but in simple, dark clothing that made him look like what he'd been before the crown: a warrior. His golden eyes reflected the lamplight like a predator's, and the space between them suddenly felt too small. "I could have you executed for leaving your room," he said quietly, moving into the archives with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable in his own lethality. "The elders are looking for any excuse." "Then execute me." Rhaine's voice came out steadier than she felt. "But you won't, because you need to know what I know, and I need to know why someone tried to murder your son with magic that only a true name-bearer could counter." Daxon stopped 3 paces away, close enough that she could see the exhaustion carved into his face, the fear he kept locked behind his alpha's mask. "Tell me about your gift. All of it. Not the carefully edited version you gave the council." "Why? So you know exactly how dangerous I am?" "So I know what I'm protecting." His jaw clenched. "Or what I'm keeping caged." The honesty of it struck her like a physical blow. At least he wasn't pretending this was anything other than what it was, a calculation, a risk assessment, a king weighing the value of a weapon against the danger of it turning in his hand. "I can hear true names," Rhaine said slowly. "The soul words that bind a wolf's spirit to their body. When I speak them, I can call a soul back from death. I can heal what's broken in the deepest parts of a wolf's being." And she hesitated. This was the part she'd never told anyone, the part that had gotten her ancestors burned and hunted. "And if I speak a true name with intent, with will behind it, I can command. I can bind a wolf's spirit to my words, make them obey, make them slaves." Daxon's voice had gone flat, emotionless in the way of someone trying very hard not to react. "Yes." The silence stretched between them like a tightrope. "Do you know mine?" The question came out rough, almost a challenge. "My true name. Can you hear it?" Rhaine's throat went dry. Of course she could hear it. From the moment he'd knelt beside her in Thornridge, his name had been singing in her bones like a tuning fork struck against her soul. She'd been trying not to listen, trying not to acknowledge the way it called to her, the way it fit against her gift like a key in a lock. "Answer me, Rhaine." He took a step closer, and she could smell pine and smoke on him, could see the way his pulse jumped in his throat. "Do you know the word that could bring me to my knees?" "Yes." The admission ripped from her. "But I would never—" "Prove it." Another step, and now they were close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Speak it. Show me you have the power everyone fears, and then show me you won't use it." "That's not how trust works. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to give me a reason to trust you." His voice dropped to something rawer, more desperate. "Because right now, Rhaine, you're the only one who could save my son, and the only one who could destroy everything I've built, and I need to know which one you're going to be." The archives were silent except for their breathing. Rhaine could feel his true name on her tongue, could feel the power coiled in her throat, ready to be released. One word, one syllable, and the Alpha King of the 5 territories would be hers to command. "No." She said it softly, but with absolute finality. "I won't speak it. Not to prove myself. Not to ease your fear. Not for any reason. Because the moment I use that power on you, everything you're afraid of becomes true. I become the weapon, and you become the victim. And I won't do that. Not even to save myself." Something shifted in Daxon's expression. Surprise, maybe, or relief, or something more complicated than either. He reached up, and Rhaine thought he might grab her, might force the issue. Instead, his fingers brushed her cheek, the touch so gentle it made her breath catch. And the world ignited. The bond slammed into both of them like lightning finding ground, a recognition so profound it bypassed thought and went straight to the soul. Rhaine gasped, her knees buckling, and Daxon caught her. his arms coming around her even as his own face went white with shock. Mate. The word screamed through every cell in her body. Mine. No, not this. Not him. Not now. Daxon jerked back as if burned, his chest heaving, his eyes wild with something between terror and wonder. What? The mating bond. Rhaine's voice shook. No. He took another step back. Putting distance between them like that could undo what had just happened. That's not possible. You can't be. I can't. I didn't choose this. The words came out sharper than she intended. Do you think I wanted to be bonded to someone who sees me as a threat? Someone who might execute me in 3 days? And do you think I can afford to be bonded to someone who could enslave me with a word? His voice cracked on the last syllable. I'm the Alpha King. I have enemies in every territory. If they find out my mate can command me, can control me, I already told you I won't. It doesn't matter what you'll do. The shout echoed through the archives, raw and desperate. It matters what they'll think you can do. What they'll fear. Every wolf in 5 territories will see you as the power behind my throne. The puppet master pulling my strings. They'll never trust me again. They'll never trust us. The truth of it settled over Rhaine like a shroud. He was right. The bond changed everything and solved nothing. It just made them both more vulnerable, more dangerous to each other. Then we ignore it, she said quietly. We pretend it doesn't exist. Daxon laughed, but there was no humor in it. You can't ignore a mating bond. It'll tear us apart from the inside. Then what do you suggest? He looked at her with eyes full of a pain that mirrored her own, the pain of finding something precious at exactly the wrong moment, of being given a gift that felt more like a curse. I don't know, he admitted. But right now, we have bigger problems. Someone tried to kill my son, and if you're right about what you heard in these stones, the conspiracy goes deeper than either of us thought. Rhaine nodded, pushing down the bond's pull, the instinct screaming at her to close the distance between them. Then we find out who. Together. Together, Daxon agreed, though the word tasted like a vow neither of them was ready to make. The whispers came to Rhaine in fragments over the next 2 days, piecing themselves together like a puzzle made of nightmares. She listened to the stones in forgotten corridors, pressed her palms against walls that had absorbed centuries of secrets, and heard the truth that Ironpeak had buried in its foundations. The silenced were real, not a legend, not a cautionary tale told to frighten young wolves. They were an army of the broken, wolves whose true names had been stolen, ripped from their souls and twisted by shadow magic until nothing remained but hollow obedience. They felt no loyalty, no love, no fear. They were perfect weapons, and someone had been building that army for years. Rhaine found the proof in a locked chamber beneath the archives, a room that reeked of old blood and newer horrors. Ritual circles carved into the floor, still stained with substances she didn't want to identify. Chains bolted to the walls, their metal corroded by something that wasn't rust. And in the center of it all, a ledger written in a hand she'd seen before. Careful, precise. The writing of someone who documented atrocities like a merchant tracking inventory. 23 names. 23 wolves who had disappeared over the past decade, all of them presumed dead or gone rogue. But they weren't dead. They were silenced. Their true names stolen, their souls enslaved, their bodies turned into puppets for someone else's war. And at the bottom of the final page, written with the casual confidence of someone who believed they'd never be caught. Phase 3. Acquire the name speaker, eliminate the heir, secure the throne. Rhaine's hands shook as she traced the words. This wasn't just about killing Kale. It was about creating a crisis that would force a true name-bearer out of hiding, force her out of hiding, so they could use her gift to enslave Daxon's entire court. The poisoning had been bait, and she'd walked straight into the trap. She heard footsteps behind her too late. "I wondered when you'd find this place." The voice was familiar, warm even, the voice of someone who'd stood at Daxon's right hand for a decade. "You're cleverer than I expected, name speaker." Rhaine turned slowly, her heart a drumbeat of dread. Corvin stood in the doorway, blocking her only exit. Daxon's beta was handsome in the way of born warriors, strong jaw, broad shoulders, eyes the color of smoke. But now that she was looking for it, she could see what she'd missed before, the emptiness behind those eyes. The way he moved just slightly wrong, like a wolf whose spirit didn't quite fit its skin anymore. "You're one of them," she breathed. "You're silenced." "Was," Corvin corrected, moving into the chamber with predatory grace. "My name was taken 5 years ago, when I was young and stupid enough to trust the wrong wolves. But unlike the others, I kept enough of myself to remember what was stolen, to want it back." His smile was a knife. "And you're going to give it to me?" "I don't know how to restore stolen names, but you can hear them, can't you?" He took another step closer. "Even now you're listening. You can hear the echo of what I used to be, trapped somewhere between my soul and the shadow that took its place." Raine's gift stirred, and against her will she did hear it, a faint whisper beneath the corruption, a name trying to claw its way back to the surface. Corvin's true self, buried but not quite dead. "Why Kale?" she asked, desperately trying to buy time. "Why poison the heir?" "Because Daxon needed to be desperate enough to make a blood oath." Corvin's voice was patient, like he was explaining something obvious to a child. "Because we needed you to reveal yourself, to come to Ironpeak where we could control you. And because once you restore my name, once you prove you can undo what was done to us, the silenced will follow you anywhere. We'll have an army that Daxon can't fight, commanded by a power he can't resist. I won't help you enslave anyone. You will." Corvin's hand shot out, faster than she could react, gripping her throat and slamming her against the wall. "Because if you don't, I'll kill that pup you worked so hard to save. I'll rip out his throat in front of his father, and then I'll use the chaos to take everything Daxon loves until there's nothing left but ashes and grief." Rhaine clawed at his hand, gasping for air, her gift screaming at her to speak his stolen name, to command him to let go. But she could feel the shadow magic wound through his soul like poisoned thread. Speaking his name might shatter him completely, might kill what little remained of the wolf he'd been. "The trial is tomorrow," Corvin continued, his grip tightening. "You'll be brought before the council, and when they demand proof of your innocence, you're going to tell them I can verify your gift. You're going to ask me to volunteer, and when they agree, you're going to restore my name in front of everyone, showing them you can undo the silencing. Then, when I'm whole again, when I have my name and my strength back, we'll take the sovereignty together. You'll speak the names of every wolf in that hall, and we'll build something stronger than Daxon ever could." "You're insane. I'm free." His eyes burned with a fanatic's certainty. "For the first time in 5 years, I have a choice again, and I choose power." He released her throat, letting her collapse to the floor, gasping. "You have until tomorrow to decide, name speaker. Help me willingly, or watch everyone you've touched die. If you believe no one should be forced into slavery, not even to save lives, hit that subscribe button now. Comment, freedom over chains. If you're against Corvin and everything the silenced represent." He left her there, alone with the ledger of the dead and the terrible weight of an impossible choice. Rhaine ran. She found Daxon in his private study, alone for once, hunched over maps marked with patrol routes and defensive positions. He looked up when she burst through the door, and the bond flared between them, concern and relief, and that constant aching pull neither of them could deny. "It's Corvin," she gasped out before he could speak. "Your beta. He orchestrated everything. The poisoning, the conspiracy, all of it. He's silenced, Daxon. His true name was stolen, and he wants me to restore it so he can build an army and take your throne." The color drained from Daxon's face. For a long moment, he just stared at her, and she watched him war with himself. The king who needed to believe his most trusted warrior could be a traitor, and the man who had fought beside Corvin for 10 years, who had trusted him with his life and his son's safety. "That's not possible." His voice was hollow. "Corvin has been with me since we were both 20. He's saved my life a dozen times. He's—" "A victim," Rhaine interrupted desperately. "Someone stole his name 5 years ago, and he's been their puppet ever since. But enough of him survived to want it back. And he thinks I'm the key." She grabbed Daxon's arms, feeling the bond pulse between them. "He's going to strike at the trial tomorrow. He's going to force me to choose between restoring his name and watching Kale die." Daxon's jaw clenched, his alpha instincts warring with his heart. "If what you're saying is true, if Corvin has been silenced, then he's not acting alone. The silenced need a master, someone to command them. Who's controlling him?" "I don't know. But there are 23 others, 23 silenced wolves waiting for the signal to attack, and Corvin wants to turn them all on your court." The implications crashed over Daxon like a wave. His beta was a traitor. His sovereignty was infiltrated. His entire inner circle could be compromised. And the one person who could save them all was the same person everyone wanted dead. "I can hear his stolen name," Rhaine said quietly, "buried under the shadow magic. I might be able to restore him, to free him from whoever's controlling him, but I don't know if it would work. I don't know if there's enough of the real Corvin left to save, or if speaking his name would just shatter what remains." "And if you do restore him," Daxon's voice was raw, "if you prove you can undo the silencing, then every silenced wolf in 5 territories becomes a potential weapon, and everyone with power will want to control me, to use my gift to build their own army." The weight of it settled over them both. The impossible choice, the terrible responsibility. Rhaine had saved one life and stumbled into a conspiracy that could destroy the entire sovereignty. "How much time do we have?" Daxon asked. "Until the trial tomorrow, maybe less." He nodded slowly, and she saw the moment the man stepped aside and let the king take over. The hardening in his eyes, the set of his shoulders, the transformation from someone drowning in impossible choices to someone ready to make them anyway. "Then we prepare for war," he said quietly, "and pray we're not already too late." The trial was supposed to be a formality, a show of justice before the inevitable verdict. Rhaine stood in the center of Ironpeak's great hall, with her wrists bound in ceremonial silver, facing 12 elders who had already decided she would die. Daxon sat on his throne with Kale in his arms, his face carved from stone, revealing nothing of the conversation they'd had in the hours before dawn. Around them, the hall was packed with nobles and warriors, all hungry for spectacle, all certain they knew how this would end. Elder Voss rose from her seat, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of law. "Rhaine of Thornridge, you stand accused of possessing forbidden knowledge, of wielding a power deemed too dangerous to exist. How do you answer these charges?" Before Rhaine could speak, the great hall's doors exploded inward. Shadow wolves poured through the entrance like smoke given form. Creatures that had once been living wolves but were now something else, their eyes empty voids, their pelts writhing with darkness that wasn't quite solid. Screams erupted, warriors drew weapons. And in the chaos, Corvin moved. He was faster than anyone expected, crossing the distance to Daxon's throne in 3 strides. The blade appeared in his hand from nowhere, and suddenly it was pressed against Kale's tiny throat. The pup's terrified wail cutting through the pandemonium like a knife. "Nobody move!" Corvin's voice cracked like thunder, freezing every wolf in the hall. "Or the heir dies right here, right now!" Daxon had gone absolutely still, his golden eyes locked on the blade kissing his son's skin. "Corvin, don't do this. Whatever they've done to you, You can't fix this, Corvin snarled, and Rhaine heard the anguish beneath his fury, the sound of someone who'd been broken so thoroughly they'd forgotten what wholeness felt like. No one can fix what was stolen from me. No one except her. His smoke-gray eyes found Rhaine across the hall. The name speaker. The only one who can give me back what I lost. The Shadow Wolves had formed a circle around the throne, cutting Daxon and Cale off from the rest of the court. More wolves materialized from the shadows, 23. Silenced, their faces blank, their movements too synchronized to be natural. They surrounded the gathered nobles and warriors, ready to strike on Corvin's command. "Here's how this works," Corvin said, his voice eerily calm despite the blade at the infant's throat. "Rhaine is going to speak the true names of every warrior in this hall. She's going to bind them to my will, turn them into what I am, what we all are, slaves, weapons. And then, when I have an army that can't be stopped, when I control the sovereignty's greatest strength, she's going to restore my name. She's going to make me whole again." "And if I refuse?" Rhaine's voice was steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. "Then this child dies, and after him, everyone else in this hall, one by one, until you change your mind or there's no one left to save." His fingers tightened on Cale, making the pup wail louder. "Choose quickly, name speaker. My patience is wearing thin." The hall had gone silent except for Cale's cries. Every eye was on Rhaine, every breath held. Daxon stared at her across the distance, and she felt the bond between them screaming, felt his terror and rage and the terrible, helpless love of a father watching his son die. She could speak the names. She could feel them all around her, the true names of every wolf in the hall singing their unique frequencies, waiting to be commanded. She could enslave them all, turn Daxon's court into puppets, become exactly what everyone feared she was. Or she could refuse and watch Cale die. Or... The thought crystallized with perfect, terrible clarity. There was a third option. A choice no one had considered because it was supposed to be impossible. Rhaine closed her eyes and listened, not to the names of the living, but to the echoes of what had been stolen. She heard Corvin's true name, not the corrupted shadow that wore his skin, but the original, buried deep beneath layers of dark magic like a pearl at the bottom of a poisoned ocean. It was faint, fractured, barely there, but it was still real. "I won't enslave anyone," Rhaine said quietly. "But I will free you." Corvin's expression shifted to confusion, then rage. "That's not—" Rhaine spoke his name. Not the command to obey, not the binding that would make him her thrall. She spoke his stolen name with every ounce of power she possessed, commanding not Corvin, but the shadow magic that had enslaved him. She spoke it with the full force of her gift, demanding that it break, that it shatter, that it release what it had taken and return it to its rightful owner. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Corvin screamed, a sound that was barely human, barely wolf, the cry of something being torn apart at the soul level. Black smoke erupted from his body like blood from a wound, writhing and shrieking as the shadow magic fought to hold on. The blade fell from his nerveless fingers. Cale tumbled from his grip, and Daxon caught his son, rolling away from the throne as Corvin collapsed. The Shadow Wolves exploded into nothing, their connection to their master severed. The silenced throughout the hall dropped like puppets with cut strings, suddenly freed from whatever had been controlling them through Corvin, and Rhaine felt her gift burn. It was like trying to contain wildfire in her bare hands, like channeling lightning through her mortal body. Breaking shadow magic wasn't like healing. It required everything she had, and then demanded more, pulling from reserves she didn't possess, consuming her from the inside out. She gasped, her knees buckling. The great hall spun around her. She could feel her body starting to fail, her mortal flesh unable to contain the power she'd just wielded. The edges of her vision went dark, and she realized with distant clarity that she was dying. Worth it, she thought hazily. Cale was safe. The silenced were free. Corvin, what was left of him, lay on the floor, his chest still rising and falling, his soul his own again, even if his mind was shattered by what he'd endured. She had chosen a third path, and it was going to kill her. Rhaine felt herself falling, felt the world tilting away. The last thing she heard before the darkness took her was Daxon's roar, raw and desperate, and full of a grief that echoed the bond breaking between them. Then she was floating in a space between heartbeats, between breaths, between life and death. Her body felt distant, unimportant. Her gift was still burning, still consuming what little remained of her, and she was too tired to fight it anymore. She'd saved them. That was enough. Voices reached her from somewhere far away, Daxon shouting her name, Senna calling for healers, Elder Voss barking orders. But they were fading, growing softer, like sounds heard underwater. Rhaine let herself drift deeper into the darkness where the pain couldn't reach, and the weight of impossible choices finally lifted from her shoulders. She had saved them all, and the cost was everything. Rhaine floated in the space between heartbeats, where the world was soft and gray and nothing hurt anymore. Her body was somewhere far below, a distant anchor she no longer needed. Her gift had burned through her mortal flesh like wildfire through dry grass, and what remained was barely enough to sustain a flicker of consciousness. It would be easy to let go, to slip further into the quiet dark and let the pain end. Then she felt it, a pull like a rope around her soul, urgent and desperate, and refusing to let her drift. The mating bond, blazing like a star in the darkness, calling her back to the world she'd left behind. No. Daxon's voice reached her across the void, raw with command and terror. You don't get to leave. Not like this. Not when I just found you. She wanted to tell him it was too late, that she'd given everything and there was nothing left to anchor to. But the bond wouldn't release her. It wrapped around her fading consciousness, like hands refusing to let go, and she felt him on the other end, felt his strength, his life force, his absolute refusal to accept her death. In the great hall, Daxon cradled Rhaine's body against his chest, her skin cold and growing colder, her heartbeat so faint he could barely feel it. Around them, the court had gone silent. Even the silenced who'd collapsed were being tended to by healers. Cale was safe in Senna's arms, wailing for his father. But Daxon couldn't move, couldn't think past the woman dying in his arms, and the bond screaming that he was losing her. My king. Elder Voss's voice was surprisingly gentle. There's nothing. There is. Daxon's voice came out fractured, desperate. The mating bond, it's still there. I can feel her on the other end, slipping away, but still there. Senna moved closer, her healer's eyes sharp with understanding. The bond is just a connection, my king. It can't give her back what she spent. Her gift consumed her life force. There's nothing left to sustain her body. Then I'll give her mine. Daxon looked up at the physician, at Elder Voss, at the entire court watching this moment unfold. A mating bond can share strength between partners. If I claim her fully, if I complete the bond, it might be enough to anchor her back. Or it might kill you both, Voss said quietly. The bond is meant to connect equals, not transfuse life from one to the other. If her body is too far gone, I don't care. Daxon's voice cracked. She saved my son. She freed the silenced. She chose the impossible path that saved everyone except herself. And I will not let her die alone in the dark, because she was too brave, too selfless for her own good. He looked down at Rhaine's face, so pale it was almost translucent. Her silver blonde hair spilled across his arms like moonlight. The woman who had walked into his life 3 days ago and turned his entire world inside out. The woman who terrified him and completed him in equal measure. His mate. Rhaine. He spoke directly to the bond, pouring everything he had into the connection between them. I claim you, not as my prisoner, not as my weapon, but as my mate, my equal, my queen. I bind my life to yours, my strength to yours, my soul to yours. Come back to me." He bit down on his own wrist, drawing blood, and pressed it to her lips. The old way, the binding way, the ritual that would complete the mating bond and make them one in the eyes of every wolf law that had ever existed. The great hall held its breath. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Rhaine's lips moved, her throat working on instinct, accepting his blood. The bond ignited, blazing so bright Daxon gasped with the force of it. He felt his strength pouring into her, felt the connection between them solidify from a fragile thread to an unbreakable chain, felt her soul grab onto his like a drowning woman finding shore. In the space between life and death, Rhaine felt the bond flood her with warmth and light and life. Daxon's strength crashed into her like a wave, his life force tangling with hers, anchoring her spirit back to her failing body. The bond transformed from a simple connection to something far more profound, a sharing of essence, a merging of souls that didn't erase either of them, but made them stronger together than they'd ever been apart. She gasped, her eyes flying open, her chest heaving with sudden, desperate breaths. The great hall erupted in shocked murmurs. Daxon's arms tightened around her, and she felt his relief like a physical thing, felt the bond between them singing with joy and terror and overwhelming gratitude. But something was different. Rhaine blinked, trying to focus, and realized she could see things she'd never seen before. Not with her eyes, but with her gift. Except now it was amplified, transformed by the bond. She saw threads connecting every wolf in the hall, luminous lines of pack bonds and blood ties and loyalties that wove through the crowd like an enormous, living tapestry. She saw the silenced on the floor, their threads severed and fraying, and knew instinctively how to mend them, how to help them find their way back to themselves. She saw Corvin, his thread so tangled and damaged it would take months to unravel, but his soul was his own again, no longer enslaved to shadow magic. And she saw Daxon, his thread bound to hers so completely they'd become a single braid of gold and silver light. "What?" Her voice came out hoarse. "What did you do?" "Saved you." Daxon's hand cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "Claimed you. Bound myself to you so completely that the entire sovereignty is going to have opinions about it." Rhaine laughed, the sound startling her with its weakness. "They already wanted me dead." "Then they'll have to kill us both." His voice held absolute certainty. "Because I'm not letting you go. Not now. Not ever." Elder Voss cleared her throat, drawing their attention. The ancient wolf's expression was complicated, skepticism warring with something that might have been grudging respect. "It seems," she said slowly, "that the Alpha King has made his choice, and by claiming Rhaine as his mate in front of the entire court, he's also claimed her as our queen." She paused, letting that sink in. "The question now is whether the sovereignty will accept a queen who wields a power we once hunted to extinction." Daxon stood, bringing Rhaine with him, supporting her weight as she found her feet. Together they faced the court, king and newly made queen, bound by a bond that blazed bright enough for everyone to feel. "Rhaine saved my son," Daxon said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "She freed the silenced. She chose sacrifice over slavery, chose to destroy herself rather than enslave others. And in doing so, she proved that the true name gift isn't the weapon we feared. It's the tool we need to heal what's been broken." He looked at Rhaine, and she saw everything in his eyes, the fear and the trust, the bond and the choice, the future they could build together if they were brave enough to try. "I name her Voice of the Sovereignty," Daxon continued, "the one who can hear what's been lost and restore what's been stolen. The one who will help us hunt down whoever created the silenced and make sure no wolf's name is ever stolen again." The court was silent, every wolf processing what this meant. A true name-bearer as their queen, a power that could command them all, standing at the heart of the sovereignty. Finally, Senna spoke up, still holding Kale. The name speaker saved the heir. That's all I need to know. She knelt, offering the formal gesture of acceptance. One by one, others followed. Not everyone. Some elders remained standing, their faces carved from disapproval. But enough knelt that it became a wave, a tide of acceptance that couldn't be stopped. Rhaine felt tears sliding down her face as she watched the sovereignty accept her, not as a threat, not as a prisoner, but as their queen. Daxon's hand found hers, their fingers interlacing, the bond humming between them like a song. "We have work to do," he said quietly, for her ears alone. "The silenced need healing. Corvin needs care. And whoever was controlling him is still out there, waiting." "I know." Rhaine squeezed his hand, feeling the threads connecting them to every wolf in the hall, to the entire sovereignty, to a future that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. "But we'll face it together." "Together," Daxon agreed, and pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers in a gesture of perfect trust. The voice of the sovereignty and her king stood before their people, bound by love and fate and the promise of a new beginning, one where the forgotten gift would heal rather than harm, where stolen names could be restored, and where two souls who'd found each other in the darkest moment could build something bright enough to light the way forward. The future was uncertain. The enemies were still hidden. But for the first time since she'd whispered Kale's true name in a cold stone chamber, Rhaine felt something she'd thought she'd lost forever. Hope. Thank you so much for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next upload. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. Tell me in the comments what you think about this story and where you're watching from. Your support means a lot and helps us keep creating more stories like this. Until next time, stay safe, stay inspired.